Twitter and other social media platforms have changed the way that we obtain the news and the way that news organizations produce the news. Social media has caused major adjustments in traditional media sectors, particularly in conservative media environments such as Saudi Arabia, where the government has historically imposed many restrictions on journalism. Mariam al-Mahmoudi is a Saudi woman who completed her bachelor degree in journalism in Saudi Arabia. She is currently working on her master's degree at Bournemouth University. Her background and her interest in journalism led her to undertake her graduate study in media and communication. After 1 year of study, she decided to do her thesis research on Twitter's impact on print newspapers. She was particularly interested in exploring Twitter's impact on Saudi print newspapers, given that Twitter was less controlled than government-controlled print newspaper in a conservative media environment. As part of her research, Al-Mahmoudi interviewed 10 Saudi journalists. After she completed her research, she enriched her work by discussing her findings in an interview with Stephen Jocks, a journalist who has worked at Reuters news agency for the past 20 years.
Good evening, and let me add my welcome on behalf of the awards team. It does seem extraordinary that Kurt's death was now more than 10 years ago, and I, like Jeremy and others, remember that day.
The purpose of conducting the interview with Jocks was to gain a practical perspective regarding her thesis topic and findings. Al-Mahmoudi research resulted in several significant findings. First, Al-Mahmoudi determined that Twitter influenced the work of professional journalists in both positive and negative ways. For example, Twitter had a positive impact on journalists' ability to find breaking news, but also increased journalists' need to check news sources.
Let's say British journalists or journalists working internationally have quite a mixed feeling about it, I would say. They can see a lot of advantages in Twitter, and they can see some negative aspects of how it's impacting on their own practice. So I think what we're seeing is Twitter as a tool in the newsroom. Effectively, it's a way of contacting sources. And I think the good news is that it means that a journalist has much more access to people than before. And I think we've also seen recently that it's been used very much for breaking news. So to give you an example, when there was the terror attack in Westminster, the first I knew about it was when I saw a tweet from the BBC's political correspondent Laura Kuenssberg, who was in Parliament and said, I've heard somebody has been shot outside Parliament. Now, that may not have been the first breaking part of the news story. It was the first thing I saw because it came up in my phone. And so, in a sense, it's not just what journalists are doing with it as a practical tool, it's how it's changing the way the public perceives news and gets its news. Because increasingly I think we're all receiving our news through social media, and Twitter is one part of that. On the other hand, I think there are downsides or disadvantages. I can think immediately of two. The first, that it can induce what I would call lazy journalism, which means that actually you're not getting out of the office, you're just relying on your Twitter feed coming through. And secondly, I think there's the problem of verification. How do you know what's being tweeted is actually true? Because you can't ask the follow-up questions always. And so, for me, social media generally, but specifically Twitter, places an emphasis on the need to verify.
Second finding is that Twitter is sometimes considered an unreliable source of news due to its dissemination of misinformation and fake news. The role of journalists as news verifiers has thus become more important than their role as news reporters.
Well, I think we need to verify news, full stop. Let's say in a pre-social media era, the news sources were usually either the journalist through research, phone calls and what have you, in which case they were verifying it as they go, or through press releases, press conferences. So there was never really much of a question. We always used to have to verify news if it came in somebody delivered you a videotape from a conflict zone and said that this was filmed from some battle or something, you never really knew whether it was accurate or not if you didn't know the person, so you had to verify it. But now it seems to me as if verification is becoming even more important because there are so many sources of news, Twitter, Facebook, whatever, Snapchat, Instagram, all sorts of stuff which is coming in and out of a newsroom.
In addition, Al-Mahmoudi found that Twitter led to an increase in the freedom of the press for Saudi print newspapers. Print newspapers in Saudi Arabia are now allowed to cover news that they weren't allowed to cover before on topics such as corruption and human rights.
So I think, if I think about Arab media, quite often I think about media which is either subtly or not subtly controlled, effectively. It's not what I would call, in most cases, a free press. Egypt has a rich history of free press. Saudi Arabia doesn't, as you know. And so, in a sense, I think it has enabled newspapers to push the boundaries. And I think always that the big danger in the Middle East media is around self-censorship. The fact that there are red lines where you never go, and that most people working on a newspaper will know where those red lines are and they won't go there because it is self-censorship, if you like. And I think what Twitter might be doing is expanding the space in which you can talk about a subject and perhaps pushing those red lines back a little so there is a debate emerging. And I think you can make a case in some countries for Twitter having increased the scope of public debate. So I think that I know for a fact that in Saudi Arabia that discussions around women's rights, for instance, I think have been facilitated by Twitter, by the fact that there is a discussion and a debate emerging through Twitter. And I suspect that might embolden newspapers, make newspapers more willing to then cover those stories as well, because they're in the public domain more, up to the point at which the government is willing to allow it.
Mahmoudi's last significant research finding is that Twitter is currently a complementary tool to print newspapers. Jocks confirmed this finding and said,
Twitter will do that. I think it's clear to me that there's a movement away from print. Whatever happens, I think people will still want print. I don't think print's going to die, but I think there's a movement away from print, and that movement has been online, and that movement has also been to individual stories posted on Facebook, retweeted, and what have you. So if I think of myself, quite often I'm looking at my Twitter feed, and what I'm getting in there are those mini URLs which will take me to news stories, or on Facebook, for instance. So I think that is happening, but I think it's complementary. I don't think we'll find that Twitter replaces a newspaper. I think it's very much complementary. And also, of course, what you're seeing is that when journalists are using Twitter, quite often they're talking about their own stories. And essentially, newspapers are seeing that as a way of promoting their news.
However, with further development of Twitter, to what extent do you think Twitter will continue to influence the journalism sector in Saudi Arabia in the future?